Solving quadratic equations by factoring. And the good news is, if you were pretty good at factoring, you should not have much trouble solving quadratics by factoring. And when we're solving quadratic equations by factoring, we are going to apply or need to use the zero product property. And the zero product property says basically this. If you have two things multiplied together, we'll use A and B, and the result is equal to 0. Then one of those two things, A, has to be equal to 0, or B has to be equal to 0, or they could both be equal to 0. But for two things to multiply together and give you a result of 0, one of them has got to be 0. Make sense? 0 times 7, let's say, the result is 0. Or maybe this is a number, 18, and B is 0. 18 times 0 is 0. So one of those two factors needs to be equal to 0. This will make more sense when we apply it to solving an equation. So let's solve this one first. Now up to this point, we didn't have an equal sign. We just had quadratic expressions that we were factoring. And but now we have an equation, and we need to figure out the values for m that make it true. And since this is a quadratic with a degree of 2, that means now we should get 2 answers. Most of the equations you solved up to this point in math had 1 answer. Most, not all. But you know for sure we need 2 answers out of this. So we are going to factor that. We'll use the diamond. Some of you probably can go ahead and factor that without even using the diamond, but we'll go ahead and write it out with the diamond format. So we put our A times C up top, which is negative 30, and then on the bottom we'll put our B value, which is negative 13. So we're looking for 2 factors of negative 30 that add up to negative 13. And that would be, what, 15 and 2 are our numbers. We've got to get the negative in the right spot. It looks like we should give the negative to the 15. So the factorization of m squared minus 13m minus 30 would be m minus 15 times m plus 2. Now we're used to leaving it there, but this is an equation this time, so we need to include that equals 0 part. Here's where the zero product property comes in. If the result of these two factors multiplied together is 0, then one of these two factors must be equal to 0. So what you do is take each factor, set it equal to 0, and solve the resulting equation. Now I really don't expect you to need to write out these very simple equations every time, but I want to just show you the first time. So how do we solve this one? We add 15 and we add 15. So m equals 15. That's our first solution. On this one, we subtract 2, and m equals negative 2. So those are the 2 solutions to this quadratic equation. If you substituted 15 here for m, worked it all out, you would get 0. But again, I would love it if in the future you just jump from this factor right to the answer. We don't need to write this out every time, but I want you to see that so you understand where it's coming from. No, we haven't seen another equation yet, but what's important and what has to be true, or how we have to have it set up to solve these, is we need the right side of the equation equal to 0. And you'll see that on another example where we have to do a little bit of work. All right, the second one, another quadratic, degree of 2, so that means we must have how many answers? Those. All right, so we're still solving by factoring. What is the first thing we always look for when we're factoring? A GCF. Yeah. What is the greatest common factor of these two terms?
5.
X. There's no 5 in this first one. X. So we factor out an X. We have X times what gives us X squared? X. Plus X times what gives us 25X? 25. And that equals 0. All right. We have split this into 2 factors. Same holds true. Zero product property. Either this factor, X, must be equal to 0. Well, there's our answer. No solving to do there. Or X plus 25 must be equal to 0. Subtract 25 and subtract 25. and x equals negative 25. So when you have a quadratic that you factor out a GCF and there's a variable in that GCF, then you're going to get one of your answers to be 0. Sometimes we'll have a GCF out front with no variable there, so that won't be a part of the solution. All right, a final example here. So this is the first one we've seen where the right side of the equation is not equal to 0. Well, we got to make that happen. What do we do to get these two over here? We use our inverse operations. I would love it if you did that in your head, but let's just show it. We add 8 and we add 8, and we will subtract 5x squared and subtract 5x squared here. So after a little bit of algebra there, we get 6x squared plus 36x plus 30 equals 0. All right, we're solving by factoring still. So remember, the first thing we always look for when we're factoring is a greatest common factor. There is a greatest common factor here, and it is 6. So we'll factor out a 6. No x on this last term, so we can't factor out a variable. So we have 6. 6 times what is 6x squared? X squared. 6 times what is 36x? 6x. And 6 times what is 30? 5. Okay, so this is a case like I was just mentioning in the last problem. There was a GCF, no variable with it, so it is not going to have any impact on our solution. We need to factor the resulting trinomial here to get our two answers. So we'll use the diamond. Again, some of you might already see what the factorization of that looks like. Our a times c up top here is 5. Our b value on the bottom is 6. Two factors of 5 that add up to 6. 1 and 5. Good. 5 and 1. So we're ready to factor it. That would be x plus 1 times x plus 5 equals 0. I really don't need to bring the 6 down because it doesn't have an impact on our solution. Now let's skip the writing out the two equations this time. I think we can tell what the answers would be here. What would our solution be from this first binomial? -1. X equals -1. Good. And this would give us x equals -5. So those are our two solutions. And you could, if you wanted to, take the time to substitute them back in to the original equation rather, and see that you would get the left side equal to the right side if you plug -1 in all the way across, or -5. So there's a little bit of information on solving quadratic equations by factoring. Thanks.